Aloha, and mahalo to the organizers for including me in this event. When debate format was suggested to me, I really didn't want to. I don't consider myself a debater. I had proposed an alternative, which was to read poetry, because that's what I prefer. And I tried, I really tried to get Ka'imi and her committee, but they didn't buy it. So I felt that since I had agreed to take the kuleana of Kana'iolowalu, that it was only proper that I be willing to stand up and tell you why. So I have prepared text because Kaleko is known to be a very eloquent speaker, and I'm a little bit intimidated, so I wrote so I wouldn't forget. Kana'iolowalu is a year-long campaign to register Native Hawaiians to form a Native Hawaiian government. One of the major criticisms is that it is a state initiative and therefore not true political self-determination. I would like to address that criticism today. Self-determination is the right of all peoples to freely determine their political status as well as their economic, social, and cultural development without external compulsion or interference. This marks the 121st year of America's illegal occupation of Hawaii. Since January 1893, America and its provisional government have illegally exercised continuous political jurisdiction over our homeland. All of the political apparatus of Kanakamo'ole sovereignty have been supplanted by America. Through exercise of police and military powers driven by its imperialist, military, and capitalist regimes, America controls all of our aina, our vai, our kai. Even the precious legacies of our ali'i that were bequeathed to our people are under America's political jurisdiction. Starting with the truth that we Kanakamo'ole never relinquished our sovereignty, that our sovereignty is still intact, but that because of America's continuing illegal occupation, we lack a government to express our inherent sovereignty. What should we as a people do? In exercising true self-determination, what must we do to throw off the yoke of colonization? In exploring these questions, there are several operative principles of international law. The first is that a people's right to self-determination can never be extinguished. The second is that the colonizer has an obligation to assist in the process of decolonization. Globally, decolonization has usually occurred only after revolution, political upheaval, and protracted violence. Employing nonviolence and civil disobedience, Mahatma Gandhi led an indigenous movement that ultimately restored, albeit imperfectly, the political sovereignty of India to its people. But in the process, the British government perpetrated many acts of violence against Gandhi and his followers. We are familiar with the revolutionary wave of violent and nonviolent riots and civil wars all over the Arab world known as the Arab Spring. These popular uprisings for political reform and change are the dramatic and graphic testament of peoples willing to cut short their lives in order to control their political destiny. Is this the path we should follow? In fact, Kanakamo'ole have and will continue to make their own path. They have never ceased as a people their resistance to American colonialism. They have never ceased their efforts to exercise a full measure of self-determination and to restore their political sovereignty. The historical record, including oral histories of political resistance from the time when America first set foot on these islands to the present, are also eloquent testimony to our assertions of self-determination, our steadfast refusal to give up our language, our religion, our traditional and customary practice such as mahi'ai, lo'ikalo, mawai'a, our unremitting and insistent demand as a people through the ages that our ways of life and knowing be respected, that in spite of our varying views, we have never surrendered our right to be who we are or to restore our political sovereignty. The cumulative mana of our people through the ages, this to me is the unassailable true record of Kanaka Maoli self-determination. To further illustrate this point, I'd like to tell you about the political journey of my good friend, Lani. In 1970, a few years out of high school, in an attempt to reform the so-called criminal justice system, Lani joined a group that stood in solidarity with prisoners, most of whom were Native Hawaiian on strike at Oahu prison. It was well known that they suffered disproportionately higher rates of incarceration for the same offenses as compared to other ethnic groups in Hawaii. The Pa'ahau were protesting acts of brutality against them by the administration and guards. Lani and her friends tossed food over the concertina wire and demonstrated outside the prison for several months, pressing for prison reform. That same year, she and her friends protested farmer evictions at Kalama Valley, and that's where she met Terry Kana'iolowalu. Over the next several years and throughout the 70s, she and her friends participated in many land eviction struggles, including at Waiholewaikane, Heiakea, Chinatown, Mokawea Island, Sand Island, Waimanalo Beach, Mapua Valley, Niumalu, Nawiliwili, Nokuli'i, and Mana, Hawaii, where the Pacific Missile Range facility is located. These were protests and demonstrations against large landowner evictions and the U.S. military occupation. At Keokahapanaewe in Hilo, she demonstrated against the state when it cut a wide swath through the middle of the Native Hawaiian community to make way for Hilo Airport. On the airport runway, a SWAT team dispersed the demonstrators with brute force. She also took her children on access trips to Kaho'olawe to protest the military's bombing of that island. In the late 70s, OHA was created. Believing in OHA's mission to better the conditions of Native Hawaiians, Lani volunteered to register voters for its first election. When OHA was created, was it part of America's conspiracy to co-opt our political movement or another means of expressing our self-determination? Queen Liliuokalani, whose motto, Onipa'a, means to remain steadfast, also famously said after the illegal coup, "The way to lose any earthly kingdom is to be inflexible, intolerant, and prejudicial. Another way is to be too flexible, tolerant of too many wrongs, and without judgment at all. It is a razor's edge. It is the width of a blade of peely grass." More than 65,000 Native Hawaiians signed up to vote in the first OHA elections. And I believe in doing so, they were attempting to balance on the razor's edge. For if anything, our Hawaiian people, our people of the land, have always been practical. They have done the things that needed to be done in order to assure their future survival. But getting back to Lani, she learned that the American legal system was being used by large corporate landowners, holdovers from the plantation era, to claim Hawaiian family lands through adverse possession and quiet title actions. So she decided to go to college so she could change that. She volunteered with a law firm so that she could understand more about the legal system. And as she and her friends learned more about the truth of Hawaii's history, they organized annual commemorative events on the anniversary of the illegal coup at Iolani Palace, much like this Onipa'a event here this evening. Lani did not join any particular sovereignty group but supported all, believing that they all advanced the cause of Hawaiian sovereignty. She did grants writing for Kalahui, Hawaii, so that it could print its constitution, educational materials, and produce videos. In accepting federal grants, did Kalahui sully its principles of self-determination? Or was this an instance where the colonizer might have been fulfilling its obligation to assist in the process of decolonization? Or were the citizens of Kalahui walking that razor's edge? Lani spent time with Pu'uhonua Bumpy Kanahele and his supporters when they occupied Makapu'u Lighthouse, supplying food and raising bail money after they were arrested and jailed. She was a character witness at the trial where Pu'uhonua was convicted for harboring Nathan Brown, whose family lands had been swindled from them by the surrounding landowner and who had as a result engaged in acts of resistance against the IRS ultimately deemed criminal by the American court system. In the early 1980s, after many years of volunteering for the nonprofit law office, Lani was offered a job. She was not a lawyer, but became the all-around guru, doing whatever was needed to keep the organization afloat. Over the next 35 years and up to the present, the attorneys have litigated groundbreaking, precedent-setting Native Hawaiian rights cases. Were they wrong to try and staunch the bleeding, to stop the dispossession from lands, and alleviate the suffering in our community by working within America's legal system? Would it have been better to allow the lands to be stolen, rights of access to be cut off, kupuna iwi to be bulldozed? In other words, take the hits to foment political crisis and bully the entire system. It is a razor's edge. Lani continued her political activism outside the law office throughout the 80s and over the following decades. In 1993, she served as one of the organizers of Kana'iolowalu, a consortium of 70 Hawaiian sovereignty groups and other organizations that developed and disseminated a sovereignty and self-determination curriculum throughout Hawaii and the public school system. The funding to undertake this effort came from a federal grant. Were they wrong to accept federal monies to further the cause of sovereignty and self-determination? In 1993, she served on the committee which organized the Onipa'a Centennial Observance at Iolani Palace. More than 30,000 Native Hawaiians gathered some days during that week. My friend Lani marched to the palace with the homestead community of Papakolea on the slopes of Pu'uwaina, where many of the early palace retainers had lived. Following the centennial celebration, Lani was nominated by the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs and confirmed by Governor Waihe'i to serve on the Hawaiian Sovereignty Elections Council, or HSEC. In 1996, they conducted a referendum of Native Hawaiian voters on the question, shall delegates be elected to form a Native Hawaiian government? 30,423 votes were cast. Of these, 22,294, or 73%, responded yes, and 8,129, or 27%, voted no. With a 73% yes vote, but criticism about state government involvement, HSEC dissolved. Some of its members nevertheless went on to create an independent organization called Hawaii to conduct the election of delegates called for in the referendum. An apportionment plan was drawn up and election of delegates held throughout the islands, polling places staffed by volunteers and vote counting overseen by the League of Women Voters as well as neutral observers. Lani was elected delegate from a district on Oahu. She served for 3 years with 70 other elected delegates from throughout the islands. Many of the delegates, including Pu'uhonua Banki Kanahele, were advocates of political independence. The delegates therefore drafted 2 constitutions to be placed before the Hawaiian people, an independence as well as an integration model. The point of sharing Lani's story with you is that she is not unique. There are thousands of Lanis. Her story is but one story, but it is also the story of our Hawaiian people. They are doing everything they can given the circumstances they confront in their daily lives to advance the cause of Hawaiian sovereignty. What emerges from over 100 years and the many thousands of lives dedicated to this cause is, in my opinion, a true movement for self-determination as elegant as any revolution, as any popular uprising, as any political upheaval. Every act, as small as putting one huli in the ground, adds to this eloquent national testament to the national pride of our people. Unrelinquished, undeterred, unified. This is the rallying call of Kana'iolowalu, the sound and thunder that emanates when many gather, when many unify. We have seized this opportunity in our history. We have utilized the means at hand. We have held it together, the fractured pieces of a traumatized people. Kana'iolowalu was and is supported by many grassroots and all of the major organizations whose memberships are Native Hawaiian or who serve Native Hawaiians. And finally, as of today, 105,000 Native Hawaiians have registered. Imperfect though it may be, Kana'iolowalu continues our historic struggle for self-determination and restoration of our nation. It is our people with great dignity and poise